What can I do based on where I am? So an example some of you may be familiar with, I am a big admirer of what's happened at Xerox in the last probably decade. Ursula Burns, who is the first African-American CEO of a Fortune 500 company, woman, it was in the Wall Street Journal yesterday because they had an article on CEO moms. And I'm a geek. I cut it out. I'm going to keep it, right? Because there's certain companies that I follow and I'm interested in. Her predecessor, Ann Mulcahy, took over Xerox when they were $17 billion in debt. Do we have anyone here from Xerox? I don't remember that from the list. $17 billion in debt. Their costs were way up. Their sales were down. They were being investigated for an accounting scandal. And she was promoted from within to be a caretaker as they prepared parts of the company to be sold off. That was it. Now, she said, okay, I'll do that. We'll prepare our components, and while we're along the way, I'm going to see if there's anything I can do. Went around the country, talked to different businesses, and she made some difficult decisions. Of course, she sold off the unprofitable business units to pay down the debt. She settled the accounting scandal and opened their books, so that was a $10 million fine, and then being more transparent about financials. And she invested $1 billion in new products. Now, their share price had been $68, and it was at about $4 when she took over. Of course, Xerox is a very sustainable, profitable environment right now. Their share price is about at 11, but their sales are up 48% this year. They've recently acquired another organization that's even putting them in another business unit. What can I do based on where I am? I think people tend to say, well, she was a CEO. She was no different than you and I. She got put in a job that she was expected to be a caretaker, and she had some experience. She'd been there a long time. She was qualified. But she said, what can I do based on where I am? So I think that's the number one thing. If you're going to have great work now and great career, you have to have that attitude as you go forward. And what that looks like is different than problem versus solution. And if you can't see this, I'll tell you what these say. A problem-oriented employee or associate says, of course I'm depressed. Wouldn't you be depressed if you worked where I work? Right? My mood, my actions are dependent on other people. I knew of an individual who actually decided what to do that day based on the glasses her boss wore. Because if he wore the bad mood glasses, you should do X, Y, and Z. If he wore the good mood glasses, then that's when you asked for things, right? There's some wisdom there. But she was heavily dependent on his moods for the day. They blame others. They're dependent on other circumstances. Typically, there's no way, or even with, and I found this quite often with the group I work with that is homeless, they will say, I'm not lucky. My brother was lucky. My brother is lucky. I'm not lucky. It's almost as if there's a universal power against me. Where the solution-oriented will say, yes, my boss is very moody. He even wears different glasses on the days when he's in a good mood or a bad mood. I am going to act this way. Right? My mood and actions are not dependent on other people. I'm independent. I can say there's always a way. I might not be able to get budget for it this year, but I could do this piece. I might not be able to do exactly that, but we'll do this instead. Here's what I need to do to gradually get support for that. Oh, it looks like that piece is never going to happen. Here's what I can do, right? And luck favors the prepared. One of my favorite statements. Those that are prepared and ready and willing, luck favors that. And although some of you may be better at Vegas, in the work environment, when you're prepared, when you've learned a couple of the other languages that your clients have, so that you can better serve them, when you've messed around with programming the robots in a different way, luck will favor the prepared. So number one component, and many of you have seen this, if you've ever worked with Franklin Covey before, we call that working within your circle of influence. And from a leadership standpoint, the number one thing that I work with people on is let's talk about all the things that you could do and all the things that are bothering you, And let's narrow it to a subset that you can influence, circle of influence, and working there. What can I do based on where I am? So that's the number one piece. Now, if we know our intent, we know our integrity, we say to ourselves, what's the number one thing I can do based on where I am? Then it gets to, I've got to do something, though. You're talking about great work, great career. I would suggest to you that a great career comes at the nexus between your natural talents, you're genetically encoded to do that, what you're passionate about, you actually care about doing something about that, what your conscience says is the right thing, and then that key piece, it's valued enough in society to get paid for it. Now, you can create a need. People have done that. Entrepreneurs create a need, right? But it has to be something that someone needs. Or we're not talking about work anymore. We're talking about your talents and passion being applied with your great tomatoes, right? That you run very well. So that nexus is your unique contribution. Now, Jim Collins calls this the hedgehog concept. He will say people develop, they know what they're best at, and they work on that, and that's the hedgehog concept. Many speakers, books, because of course I'm an avid reader of these kinds of things, will say that's what you need to do. And I was sitting in an audience with an individual, and we actually saw Jim Collins speak, and they said, yeah, I don't know how. I get that. I'm not going to question it. What I don't understand is how I'm supposed to figure that out. When Oprah says to live my best life, what is that? You know? And I think that's where this really comes into play. So what the book has is some exercises to walk through that.